At Harrenhal, Locke presents his captives, Jaime Lannister and Brienne of Tarth, to the castle's northern castellan, Lord Roose Bolton. Proud of his work, Locke boasts about maiming Jaime, oblivious to Bolton's dismay at the loss of such a valuable hostage. He even displays Jaime's severed hand, strung around the prisoner's neck as a gruesome trophy. Displeased, Bolton orders him to get rid of it, and sees that both prisoners receive accommodations. When Jaime inquires about news from King's Landing, Bolton deliberately prolongs the revelation, keeping Jaime in suspense. He finally informs him that Stannis Baratheon's forces were defeated at the Battle of Blackwater, and Jaime's sister, Cersei, is safe. Overcome with relief, Jaime collapses, prompting Bolton to summon Qyburn to tend to his injuries. Later, Qyburn examines Jaime's stump, peeling away the crude tourniquet applied by Locke's men. The wound is severely infected. When Jaime asks if he will die, Qyburn assures him that he will live, though the safest option is to amputate the arm at the shoulder. Weak from infection, Jaime refuses and threatens Qyburn if he tries. He then notices that Qyburn lacks a maester's chain and questions him about it. Qyburn admits that the Citadel stripped him of his title for conducting experiments deemed too extreme. As he prepares to operate, Jaime, determined to keep as much of his arm as possible, grabs Qyburn's throat, forcing him to consider an alternative approach. Qyburn agrees to cut away the rotting flesh and cauterize the wound with boiling wine, though he warns Jaime it will be excruciating. Jaime refuses any painkillers, stating he will simply scream. As Qyburn begins the procedure, Jaime howls in agony. Later, Brienne bathes in Harrenhal's bathhouse, washing away weeks of dirt and grime from their journey. Jaime, barely able to stand, enters with the help of a servant. He dismisses his aide and strips before stepping into the same communal bath as Brienne, despite her protests. He weakly argues that he needs someone to keep him from drowning, as he refuses to become the first Lannister to die in a bathtub. Brienne, irritated, questions why she should care about his fate, but Jaime reminds her that she swore to deliver him to King's Landing in one piece, something that, given his missing hand, isn't going well. When Jaime mockingly remarks on her failure to protect Renly Baratheon, Brienne furiously stands, fully exposed, to prove she isn't intimidated. Realizing his comment was cruel, Jaime solemnly apologizes. Though Brienne initially thinks he's mocking her, he insists his apology is genuine. Exhausted, he proposes a truce. Brienne points out that trust is necessary for a truce, to which Jaime responds that he does trust her. She hesitates but ultimately sits back down. Jaime then reflects on how people have looked at him with disdain for 17 years, calling him Kingslayer, Oathbreaker, and a man without honor. Finally, he reveals the truth behind his infamous betrayal. He describes the Mad King Aerys II's obsession with wildfire, recounting how the king delighted in burning people alive, lords, failed hands, and even those he merely suspected of disloyalty. When half the realm rebelled against him, Aerys ordered caches of wildfire to be placed beneath King's Landing, under the Great Sept of Baelor, Fleabottom stables, and even the Red Keep itself. After Robert Baratheon's victory at the Trident, he marched on the capital, but Tywin Lannister arrived first, feigning loyalty while planning to sack the city. Jaime tried to warn Aerys, telling him his father would never back the losing side. Varys echoed the warning, but Grand Maester Pycelle reassured the king of Tywin's loyalty. Aerys believed him and opened the gates, only for the Lannisters to betray him and storm the city. Jaime begged Aerys to surrender, but instead, the king ordered him to bring Tywin's head and commanded his pyromancer to ignite the wildfire caches, burning the city and its people. At that moment, Jaime made his choice. First, he killed the pyromancer. Then, when Aerys tried to flee, Jaime drove his sword into his back. As the king lay dying, he ranted that he would be reborn as a dragon in the fire. To make sure he would never return, Jaime slit his throat. Brienne listens in stunned silence. When she asks why he never defended himself, Jaime bitterly replies that Eddard Stark never gave him the chance. Stark had already judged him guilty, and wouldn't have believed him anyway. Anger wells up in Jaime as he rages about the injustice of it all, questioning what right Ned Stark had to judge him. Overcome by the strain of recounting his past, Jaime collapses, slipping into unconsciousness. Brienne catches him just in time and calls for help, shouting for aid for the Kingslayer. In his final moments of consciousness, Jaime weakly murmurs, "Jaime, my name is Jaime." At Dragonstone, King Stannis Baratheon remains deeply despondent following his crushing defeat at the Battle of the Blackwater. His forces are shattered, and though the Lannisters have not yet launched an attack on Dragonstone, it is only due to the heavy loss. Adding to Stannis' isolation is the absence of the Red Priestess, Melisandre, who departed on an important but undisclosed mission. With little else to occupy him, Stannis visits his wife, Queen Selise, for the first time since his return. He finds her in her chamber, kneeling before a fire in fervent prayer to the Lord of Light. Selise is a devoted and fanatical believer, and it was she who first invited Melisandre to Dragonstone. Their marriage has never been one of love, but she idolizes him as both her king and the prophesied prince. She urges him not to despair, insisting that despite his setback, he will ultimately emerge victorious. Stannis, burdened by his rigid sense of duty, Stannis is tormented by the knowledge that he broke his marriage vows by sleeping with Melisandre. He attempts to confess his sin, believing he has dishonored Selise, but she interrupts him with startling indifference. Melisandre has already told her everything, and Selise does not see his actions as sinful. Rather, in her eyes, anything done in service to the Lord of Light is righteous. She even wept with joy when she learned that Melisandre had given him a son, something she heard. Stannis looks at her with a mixture of shock, disgust, and relief. Selise had 3 sons, but all were stillborn, and she walks over to a corner of the chamber where their tiny corpses are preserved in glass. The loss of her children, and her inability to provide Stannis with a living male heir, she weeps over her failure, lamenting that she has given Stannis nothing. With uncharacteristic softness, Stannis tells her that is not true. She understands his meaning immediately. He is referring to their only child, Princess Shireen. Annoyed, she dismisses the notion, but Stannis insists that Shireen is his daughter, and Selise, though reluctant, relents, acknowledging that it is not her place to question her king. Shireen is alone in her chamber, drawing and singing to herself about life under the sea when her father enters. She is a bright and kind-hearted girl, though afflicted with grayscale, which has left the left side of her face scarred and disfigured. Despite her cheerful demeanor, her life at Dragonstone. Excited to see her father, she asks if he won the battle. Stannis, in his usual blunt manner, simply answers, no, slightly disappointed. She quickly shifts focus, asking if the Onion Knight, Esser Davos Seaworth, has returned. Stannis, now tense, tells her that Davos that night, unable to ignore her concern for Davos, Shireen sneaks down to the castle's dungeons and finds his cell. Davos wakes to find her peering inside and warns her that she should not be. She asks if it is true that he is a traitor, and Davos, with a resigned sigh, confirms that he disobeyed her father. Shireen, unbothered, declares that she doesn't care, he is still her friend. Knowing how dull imprisonment must be, she has brought him a book, An History of Aegon the Conqueror and His Conquest of Westeros. She excitedly points out that Aegon Targaryen once lived in Dragonstone and built his empire from there. Davos, however, hesitantly admits that he cannot read, believing the book will be of no use to him. Shireen, unfazed, offers to teach him. When Davos protests that they cannot, she playfully asks what the guards would do if they were caught. Lock them, and Shireen begins reading aloud, starting his first lesson in literacy beneath the dim torchlight of the dungeons. In King's Landing, Queen Regent Cersei Lannister approaches Petter Littlefinger Bellish in a courtyard, voicing her concerns about. She believes they do not have the Lannisters' best interests at heart, yet her father refuses to see the threat. Since Littlefinger was instrumental in brokering the Lannister-Tyrell alliance, she asks him to use his network of spies to uncover. He agrees, though she warns him that she expects better results than his failed attempt to locate Arya Stark, who remains missing. Meanwhile, in the castle gardens, Sansa Stark and Margaery Tyrell watch Esser Loras spar with his squire. Sansa, growing more confident in her future, praises Loras' skill and eagerly asks when they will be wed. Margaery reassures her that she will plant the seed of the idea with Joffrey after their own wedding. Believing she can persuade, though skeptical, Sansa allows herself to hope. After the match, Esser Loras returns to his chambers with his squire, Oliver, where the two share an intimate encounter. During their pillow talk, Loras casually mentions that he is engaged. Unbeknownst to him, who ensures it reaches Cersei. Shortly after, Littlefinger meets with Sansa, offering her a place on his ship when he departs for the Vale of Arryn. Sansa, wary and more aware of the dangers surrounding her, cautiously declines, telling him they should wait until after Joffrey's wedding. She claims it is for his safety should the plan fail, Though a master manipulator himself, Littlefinger detects her hesitation. Instead, he feigns appreciation for her concern and insists that she call him Petter.